During the Renaissance, Venice was a place fixated on status and consumption. This obsession included the buying and selling of sex. Like most places in Europe during this period, there were many poor women working as prostitutes to make ends meet. What Venice's sex trade was known for, though, was its reputation for having some of the most beautiful courtesans in all of Europe. For aristocratic men, it was highly unusual for them to be married until they became of political age, which was usually around the age of 27. This expectation for Venetian men to marry so late came with some significant consequences for both the men themselves and the state. In numerous books in the Bible, there are references of forbidding sexual intercourse outside of marriage, such as Exodus chapter 20, verse 14, "You shall not commit adultery." Being the city wanted to showcase their Catholic faith, upholding the morals of the Church was of the utmost priority for the Venetian people. However, considering that aristocratic men had to wait until they were nearly 30 to marry, it was an accepted idea that these men should satisfy their sexual needs during the period between adolescence and marriage, even though they were going against the teachings of the Bible. Aristocratic men, though, were absolutely forbidden to have any sexual relations with a woman of their social class, as it would dishonor the lady, but it was also frowned upon them to have sex with a woman of a lower class. Here is where courtesans came in. A courtesan is different to a prostitute in that she is well dressed, intelligent, talented in music and writing, and is solely reserved for noblemen's pleasure. Although they were sex workers, they were also hired for companionship and entertainment. They proved a convenient way for aristocratic men to experience sex without dishonoring a noblewoman or being involved with a woman of a lower class. In a way, courtesans were in a class of their own, although never accepted as a part of the aristocracy. The religious dilemma, though, was still a concern. Even though it was not acceptable, according to the Bible, to practice adultery, like many Christian communities, the Venetian government considered prostitution to be a necessary evil and tolerated it. A courtesan usually began her career by working as a prostitute, although there are some cases where women have been trained, usually by family members, to be a courtesan, such as the famous Veronica Franco, whose mother was also a courtesan. Once they gained their courtesan status, they were able to charge large prices for their services, which, along with their whereabouts, were advertised in the catalogue of the principal and most honourable courtesans of Venice. In this book, the names, whereabouts, and prices of the city's courtesans were recorded so that travellers could know where to go if they wanted to hire them. Because of their high prices, many courtesans could afford to live in great splendour, often owning or renting a large house where they could entertain and have their clients. Their wealth also meant that they could afford rich clothing, expensive food, and other luxuries. Wealth also allowed them more freedom than most Venetian women, as they did not have to obey a husband, father, or the rules of a convent. They were free to be their own master. Unfortunately, though, the free and rich life of a courtesan was a short-lived one. Being sex workers, courtesans were at high risk of contracting sexually transmitted diseases. During the Renaissance, syphilis swept throughout Europe and it is believed to have been the cause of over 5 million deaths. Given that this is a pre-modern medicine time, syphilis appeared as large pustules all over the body, with the victim dying within a few months of contracting the disease. Having this disease not only meant that the courtesan was sick, it also meant the end to her career and thus income, leaving her extremely vulnerable. Pregnancy was also another threat to a courtesan's career. While a courtesan was pregnant, she could not work, leaving her without income for months at a time. After several pregnancies, it became increasingly harder to continue their work, and there was also the emotional burden of what to do with their children. Some courtesans kept their children, but many babies were sent to orphanages. After multiple pregnancies, if the lady had not already died from giving birth, her career would be shortly over, but when a courtesan had had multiple pregnancies, her body was often not considered to be attractive anymore to be worth paying for. Another danger to courtesans was being accused of practicing witchcraft. Being a Catholic city, the knowledge of a woman's reputation as seductress was well known in Venice. In the book of Genesis, Eve is portrayed as the seductress of Adam, who convinces him into eating the forbidden fruit. From this idea of the evil seductress was born, and many believe that prostitutes and courtesans possessed the power to seduce innocent men, just as Eve seduced Adam. Veronica Franco herself was accused of being a witch in 1580, after Rodolfo Venetali anonymously accused her of practicing heretical magical incantations in her house, as well as being a common prostitute. Her trial was done in an inquisitorial style, meaning there were no witnesses, just a series of interrogations by the inquisitor. Franco acknowledged that she had chanted incantations, but that it was because it was the fashionable superstition at the time, and not because she was a witch. Due to no evidence nor witnesses, she was let off the charges. But the fact that one man's suspicion resulted in an interrogation shows how quickly the government was to jump on complaints of witchcraft on a well-known courtesan. Although it is unlikely that Franco would have been found guilty, considering that most women charged with the use of sorcery lived in remote areas of the Venetian Republic, she was still extremely likely to have not been found guilty, as the punishment for sorcery was to be burned alive. Overall, although being a courtesan allowed a woman to be more independent, to have her own money, and to control her own life, the long-term consequences of working as a sex worker overshadowed these short-term perks. Besides the threat of syphilis, dying in childbirth, or being accused of practicing witchcraft, when a courtesan began to age and lost her looks, then her career was over. In 1542, the courtesan Julia Lombardo declared herself impoverished, blaming her situation on no longer being a flower that many could desire. Being a courtesan may have allowed for a woman to have more freedom for a short time in her life, but overall she was in an equally vulnerable position, just as other Venetian women were.